Hello and welcome to a new episode of DeFiChain Tech Talk. A long time ago we had this format, but finally I got Prasanna, and he will talk about what's happening in the background on DeFiChain-Labs, what they are planning, doing, and so on. A lot of things we will cover. It's not a specific one. Also, maybe an information for you out there. Put your questions here in the chat if you're watching live, and we will have a look on it, and Prasanna tries to answer them. Before we start now, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel so that you will not miss any show in the future. And with this, I would like to welcome Prasanna. Welcome back here on stage. Pretty long ago, it was before MetaChain launch, and now we are several weeks and months after launch. A lot of things change. How are you?
Hi Dizzy, thank you so much for having me. Yes, it's been it's been really long time. Yes, good. Yeah, I've been having some family commitments over the last 2 weeks, and then just popped in, and there's been a lot going on in the last 2 weeks as well. But on the tech side, things are going pretty strong as well. So excited to share about it. We can walk through some of the things that's been happening. Particularly over the last 3 months, from the CFP to what the next roadmap is. There are lots of things that we can, at least walk through on the high level, and then provide as much understanding as possible on how the rest of the year is going to look like. Yes, so before we jump into that, I think we're going to follow a slightly different format. It's not going to be a presentation, because as I understand, there's a lot of questions from the community side as well. So we'll start out with the large roadmap and a Trello board, which is something that's still in the works, but so that it's going to be a recurring theme this year going forward, where most of the high level items are going to be there, so people are going to be looking at it a lot. So I thought we might as well start with there, and then walk through as a part of that, because we're going to be doing that a lot going forward. Then jump into maybe the engineering competence of the CFP, what that means, what are some of the things that we're going to be doing, and then the larger highlights. And can probably start there. But meanwhile, let's keep this more interactive as well, because the whole point of this is have that communication going forward, and also how we want to structure some of the next 6 months, which is going to be pretty critical. I'll come to why that is, but it's related to the CFP as well.
Okay, sounds good. So I think it's really worth to give us an insight, what you are doing with the Trello board, what is planned, what are the topics, because I think a lot of people out there don't see it, what you are doing on a daily basis. Should we switch to screen share and you start with this, or?
Yeah, that's excellent. Let's actually do that. So so the Trello board will share the link as well. It is still the whole intent of the Trello board is right now it's very rough around the edges, but the general idea is we picked Trello because it's people they don't need to be on GitHub, they don't need to be on anything specific, but it's also extremely simple. The idea on what is going to be there is going to be just the high level items. So it's easier for people to track what's being built, what is being worked on, what's not being worked on a very high level. It's not going to be the specific engineering topics. The best place to discuss that is always going to be GitHub. And that's where most of those elements are going to happen. And also, DFIP related conversations, operations, perhaps we'll have completely separate board where D tokens and things like that. There's a lot of operations around it that can be managed separately, but this is going to be more focused on the core engineering elements of it. And even that, what is the core engineering elements is also, I think, another question that I would like to touch upon a little bit before we even start, which is so DeFiChain, if you look at it, has always been in a very interesting mix of layers in the blockchain world, where most chains fit in its layer one, Bitcoin, Ethereum. Then you have layer two, things that are built on top of primarily Ethereum and most other networks as well. However, if you look at DeFiChain, we have that Bitcoin foundations, but at the same time, we also have a lot of DeFi components built right into the chain itself. And then we added EVM, and now we have a multi-VM architecture. So which kind of makes the question of, okay, where does it actually stand? And I think this is important to understand because uh, going forward, how does DeFiChain-Labs as a team work, and which areas they're going to work? How does, other parts of the ecosystem like Bake, like Birthday Research, all of them, where do they integrate? Like application developers, users, like where do they all come in? I think it's good perspective to have, and I'll share my perspective on how I'm thinking and some of the team members are thinking about it. So DeFi chain, that layer one is that current existing consensus. Right now, everything is modeled together in that layer one. But now, as we're building more and more, particularly towards the VM independent architecture, we also have confidence of what I would like to think of as layer zero. And what this means is primarily it's going to be the multi-VM architecture and also things that can support consensus and applications that can be built on top. What I mean by that is even having on-the-fly updates of consensus-related items, which is also going to lead us back to WASM, which is something that's still under R&D. I won't talk much about WASM right now because we're still researching about a lot of these things, and we'll eventually come out with a design document, and then we can discuss that more. However, it's going to be a very critical part this year because there are a lot of interesting things that we think will take DeFi chain in a completely unique space, which is being researched on right now. But that being said, this is the layer zero. And the core goal of layer zero is to provide the tools and act as a platform to be able to build more things and to enable more things on layer one. What is layer one? Layer one is the current consensus, a whole bunch of DVM related elements, including the basics of D-token systems, the basics of DEX, things like that. Right now, today, there's also a lot more things on top of it, which is, the Oracle related items and the D-token economy itself. But going forward, I'd like to think of that as a 1.5 layer. The reason I don't do it as layer two is because then there'll be confusion on, okay, layer two is this clear EVM land and applications built on EVM, right? So just not to add to the confusion, to instead have a little bit more clarity, the way I like to think of it as layer 1.5. Why is this 1.5 important? Is 1.5 is not something which the DeFiChain-Labs team is going to be directly focusing on. Right now, there's still a lot of migration that's going on and a lot of transition that's going on. So the labs team will continue to support whatever is the key elements that's required. But eventually, these are all economic aspects that are bound to keep changing, right? So the labs team is going to be more focused on enabling more and more on that layer. But more and more currently today, to just provide an example and who are all interested in there, I think the D-token system community is massive interest. Bake has expressed massive interest. So there's a lot around it, but just consistently building there for the labs team is not going to be the highest priority, right? Because just to provide some perspective, I think we did that in 2022, where it was just many defibs on iterating the economy, but then the layer zero and layer one did not make a lot of progress. So I think it's important to sort of segregate this, and the labs team focus on these, while other teams can, birthday research, all of those teams can focus on building on top and continuing that layer, right? So that's a way that we're thinking about and then moving forward. And the 1.5 layer, what is particularly going to have are things that are not necessarily related to enabling more, however, things that are still has massive utility and community interest. So which is going to be things related to Oracle system, things related to operations of the D-token systems, the bot that was built very recently in January, which helped the whole DUSD mechanics of it. All of those things are things that you can think of as 1.5. And then above it comes EVM and things where developer land, where developers can build their own applications. Now, the WASM aspect beyond layer zero is also going to add into layer two. But I think it's, at this moment, I think that's as much as we can share, because we do need to make more progress before we can share what are all the things that we can do related to WASM. Okay, this is kind of a high-level construct. I think with this perspective, let's start looking at a little bit more. Let me start out with the roadmaps, and then we're also starting to implement release windows.
Mm-hmm.
Release windows are extremely important now because we have a lot more partner ecosystem bridges and a lot more providers connecting into EVM. So, which means that releases can't be at will or as and when people are, hey, I want a feature now, right? So then it requires a lot of partner ecosystems to upgrade. So we need to bring a lot more deterministic aspects to that, so people know when to expect, and so they can plan their operations around that. So that's going to be another one, and then we can touch up a little bit on what are the things that's being worked on right now. So yeah, so this is just a board to start off with. This I expect will continue to improve in the next couple of months. But in any case, let's start out with the open roadmap. So what the open roadmaps are going to be about is the CFP formation has an addendum into which the proper documents will be added as it's worked on. But today, just to give an early insight into some of these are things that the community is aware of, but just provide a larger context on what are all these. So large level key fixes and stability are things that are some of the most important things for the first quarter. This is more of the first half. What is the thing that the engineering team is being focused on? Key fixes, update tokens, which is actually an RPC, which is used to update the naming of tokens. Currently, I think Facebook Meta rename was
Mm-hmm.
blocked for a very long time. The rationale for that was there were a couple of things related to the pool update of that was not complete. So we needed a hard fork to wrap up all of that. So and then we added EVM, which meant we also had to carry this into EVM land. So all that support was missing because we just needed to. The intent was to provide EVM as soon as possible, and this took a little bit of a backseat. So that is being completed. I believe the PR for that is pretty much already there. So this is one of the key candidates for the next hard fork, and then uh, splits. So all of the token splits, token migrations, all of that was temporarily paused after EVM launch. Because before that, everything worked as expected, but post EVM, we didn't extend the support into EVM. So if we were to do stock splits, then there'll be a disconnect between EVM and DVM side. So we temporarily paused all of it. And what that means is currently, whatever is happening in the markets, the way that the reaction of that is going to be applied on the Oracle level. So Oracle level multipliers applied. So there's no action that's needed by anybody at the moment. However, on-chain splits are temporarily passed until the next upgrade. So I'll also cover a little bit on how we are doing that when we get into that. But for now, that is a
Mm-hmm.
priority. And then negative interest rates, dynamic negative interest rates, that's also mostly, I believe it's done. PR for that is there. So these are all the work that's been happening in January. The first three is most of it is done. There's still a little bit of work to be done. However, we're optimistic that it may actually make it into the upcoming network upgrade. Then a couple of other things that's been scheduled for the first half of 2024. It's going to be improvements to transfer domain. What that means is transfer domain, the whole intent of transfer domain is that this becomes the one API to move across any domains. However, today UTXO is something that's missing. So it's just provided between DVM and EVM because for UTXO, you have other APIs that can do it. But now that we have transfer domain, there's no need for the other APIs. So eventually going forward, the other APIs will slowly be deprecated. It's not going to be taken away. It's going to be there. However, it will not be the preferred way to do it. Preferred way will move to transfer domain, and it can also move UTXOs. The biggest advantage of that is you will no longer need to move UTXO to DVM to EVM. Then you can just do UTXO to EVM directly, and vice versa. So those are things that will enable, but not just that. The other component of transfer domain that's also in the roadmap is adding an EVM opcode. So EVM has a one-way transfer domain. What that means is if you have a contract or if you own something in EVM, you will be able to move it out of EVM into something else, but it's a one way out. Only from the DVM land you can move between across different things. So this is going to be very useful in a sense. Smart contracts can now, as long as they own it, they can trigger a transfer out. But they won't be able to do anything beyond that. So it's a very limited transfer domain. But once this support is in, it provides application developers with a lot more opportunities and a lot more tools to automate many of the things and relieve some of the pain points. So that's regarding transfer domain. And then attributes context is more of a it's been a backlog for a long time in terms of performance upgrades in the node. So I don't think we need to cover too much of that. Snapshots based RPC responses. So this is a little bit more context on that. Is most of the people who have worked with the DVM RPCs will know that it's actually pretty painful to work with because there'll be a very long wait. So if you're running some sort of public nodes, then every single call will end up blocking everything else. This was something that was inherited from the Bitcoin land, where there is a global lock, and that global lock basically is something that every RPC is dependent on. So everything in DVM land was built the same way, using the same global lock. However, for the last couple of months, there's been slowly work going in, and it's pretty much almost complete. And pool pair RPCs is implemented as the first stage. And once we know that it works, then we'll just expand it to a lot more RPCs. The impact of that is that it'll no longer use a global lock. Instead, it'll use the database snapshots to be able to produce results. What this will mean is most of the read-only RPCs will just respond pretty much immediately. So there will not be 10-second waits and 15-second waits on a publicly used node that's being rammed by a lot of requests. That'll be pretty massive for anybody who is running anything on infrastructure, and will also massively reduce infrastructure costs. So that's the other key aspect it's almost complete. Then coming to a more of a stability focus. So EVM database integrity checks were not in place. I think this caused a lot of confusing behavior early in January, because for some people, the chain seemed like it was following a different chain. But what was actually happening was, when the local data was corrupt, or when the node was not shut down, it was not, when you restart the node, it wasn't checking the integrity of EVM database. So on the DVM side, if the integrity failed, it will just tell you, hey, your data is corrupt, so you need to reindex. But on the EVM side, it didn't do it, so it just ended up following a corrupt chain. It ideally should not happen, but usually only happens when the node was not shut down or anything like that. So this is already in. I believe it's already a part of the most recent release. So from it no longer should that behavior be there. That's already completed. And then EVM filters. Filters was something that, again, was just very, very basic early implementation that was there last year. So now that's being refined. The stability of that is being improved. There were a couple of memory leaks and all of that there. It's just, if people are running master nodes, or just running nodes, there's no reason for any of this to affect. But people running nodes which are used for indexing, used publicly, then all of that, this is a key factor. So it'll help in terms of performance and the node stability of it. Then just EVM RPCs in general, there were a lot of shortcuts that was taken last year. So now the team has been refining that slowly and then fixing a lot of that up. So from an infrastructure point of view, everything is a lot more stable. That being said, the next large stability context is Ocean. I think last 2 to 3 months, Ocean, there's a lot of questions on, hey, why is this slow? Why is there's a lot of instabilities around it? So zooming out of it, Ocean, the intent of Ocean was actually to provide a stable API. Because back in the day, like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, the node APIs were not stable. They were constantly changing. Now, in the last 2 years, that has changed considerably. Now, the node APIs the team tries to make as much effort as possible to keep it backward compatible. And if it's not, then it's actually a breaking change, right? And it should not be a part of smaller updates, and to the point that you can actually consider that as a bug. So now the team maintains that discipline. However, Ocean is something that has better APIs because it was designed later, and a lot of projects have started to depend on it. So what we actually decided to do was, it is currently a separate indexer project in JavaScript. And so you run the node, and then you run another indexer that talks to the node constantly, ramps the node, pulls information from the node, and then indexes it, and then serves those requests. So there are a lot of different moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
And what the team has been working on over the last month is, from December, is why don't we eliminate the whole thing and then provide that thin layer of API into the node itself. And that is also reaching almost completion. The big advantage of that is Ocean as a concept can now be completely forgotten from an infrastructure point of view. So there will no longer be that component at all. And all you need to do is just run a node, and you will have those APIs that's supported by the node itself. It's going to be 100% compatible. And that's being built, and it's opt-in. So whoever is running the node can choose not to provide that if they don't want to. So there's not going to be any extra overhead based on that. But if you want to use it, this is going to be much faster than the previous implementation. Because the node already has most of the data, it already has most of the context, so it's just serving it up, rather than Ocean, where it did a lot more work. The current implementation of Ocean, that did a lot more work, and things were a lot slower. That also being said, one other key thing related to Ocean is, Ocean was also one of the component which was difficult from a time point of view, because to do a fresh index of Ocean, it would take somewhere between 3 to 3.5 weeks on mainnet. So from start, it was always, people were very heavily dependent on snapshots, or you have to plan it 3 to 4 weeks ahead. And if there's any bugs in that picked up, then it extends the time by another 3 to 4 weeks. This was a common theme towards the end of last year. And this was also one of the major reasons to eliminate that, is why the team picked it up and then built it in Node. So now all of that time is just gone. So it's just simply the node indexing time. That's it. Nothing else.
Just to summarize the last point, this means at the moment we have a central Ocean API which is used by the Light Wallet, for example, and in future the Light Wallet is communicating with any node out there, for example a master node or whoever is there, and search for it automatically. So you are not relying on this central entity. Is this a right understanding?
Yes and no. What that means is, if you're running your own node, you can point the Light Wallet to your node, and everything will just work.
Okay.
However, the goal is also not to remove ocean.defichain.com. That is still going to be there.
Okay.
So now it's more of a convenience rather than a requirement. Right? So the default versions of Light Wallet can just still rely on it, and there are other alternate providers as well, like my DeFiChain, and they can also use the same thing. However, the way these infrastructure providers run is going to be massively simplified, because you don't need so many different components now. All you're doing is just running a set of nodes and exposing those nodes. That's all.
Okay, thanks.
So across the board, it is something that I think will help massively, and also and for infrastructure providers, cost as well. We're hoping that it's going to, it's, from early tests, it's going to be less than 1/10 of what it was, and cost, performance combined with the snapshot-based RPCs are also going to be very, very significant. I don't want to provide any numbers right now, because we've not really completed it and seen it, but it's going to be like really, really significant. Right, we're looking at 10x factors for many things. So that's Ocean. This has been a large chunk of the work. So after this part is done, the way it's also going to look like is, the current Ocean project is not going away. The current infrastructure will continue to run the same way, because this is going to be a slow migration process. So early on, then one of the next upcoming node releases will enable that. People can opt in, start building on it, and then slowly we will do A/B testing of both, ensure that everything is going okay, and it'll be perhaps a 2-month process, 2 to 3 month process, where we slowly migrated out completely, and then pretty much Ocean is fully integrated in the node, and there's no other external project. So that's there. And then from a stability point of view, then it's, some of the 4.0.6 or 7 also included health checks. Now, in order to know if a node is actually uh, alive and healthy, healthy was a subjective concept before, because you also need to know whether it's following the right chain, and that was always very subjective. Now the health checks actually go a much more, it performs a lot more intuitive actions, where it tries to see, is the node actually connected to a good set of peers, and then are all the peers responding the same way, and are all these nodes in consensus in a certain time frame. So this is a health check that people can actually rely on to understand if their node is actually healthy and is connected to a healthy network. Again, it can never be 100% because that's the whole concept of decentralization. However, as to how every other node is you're connected to is responding, is your node responding the same way, is something that these health checks will give you. So this is particularly going to be useful for people who are infrastructure providers who are scaling it up, down, and things like that.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Prasanna. I tried to play a little bit of timekeeper. So you are tackling currently a lot of technical issues. Yeah, we still have our CFP in mind you want to show, and
Yes.
what's DeFiChain-Labs. And we are getting some questions. Just keep in mind that
Yeah.
we have these blocks.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so just super quickly, I'll touch on what are the other EVM stuff. Trace transaction, which is something that's required for Block Scout. I think there are quite a few from the community who are expecting that as well. That's also being worked on. And then estimate gas required a few fixes, and it was also a slow RPC. That fixes for that is also upcoming, so we should help Block Scout indexing and a whole chunk of it. Again, Boston part, that's something for later. Uh, Release windows. So this is another thing that's going to be quite important, which is now major network upgrades. We're going to have a 4-week window per quarter, which is going to be now the first one is going to be starting in March. Next one's going to be in June. Next one's going to be in September. Last one, December. That's only if needed. So what this means is any network related upgrades are going to be in this 4-week period. 4-week period, the precise time will be based on that release, and then the team will closer to it, the team will determine the release date. But the way it's going to operate is all the features that's being worked on is whatever makes it in this window are the ones that's going to be a part of that release. If nothing makes it, then in that particular window, you miss the window, then there's just going to be no other network release until the next window. Right, so this deterministic approach is very important because it helps everybody align to, okay, this is the point where there's going to be network upgrade, so they can plan things around it. Of course, security upgrades are not a part of it, but security is exactly that, just that. Only not for economic or operational implementations. That's purely just if there's a security concern, will we break any of these? Right. So, and then patch release windows as well. Last week of every month, we'll roll up whatever has made it, whatever has been tested, whatever the core team is confident. That'll move on to the patch release. It's going to be at the end of every month. And so, again, we'll have more documentation covering all of this more extensively, but I just wanted to give a very high level idea on what it is at the moment. Okay, so yeah, these are some of the other things that's being worked on. I don't think we need to touch on this too much at the moment. Perhaps I'll touch on one thing, which is stock splits, because splits are something that's being worked on right now. There are going to be two approaches. One is there's a DeFi intrinsic contract. Currently, that contract will now include a function for migrating tokens on EVM land, and people who are on the EVM side will have to call that function, and then they will end up receiving the new token set. Because in EVM land, one of the key things is it has to be claimed by that particular user. Otherwise, we end up breaking a lot of different assumptions across the board. So we can't just completely force migrate as we do in DVM side. So DeFi intrinsics is one approach. The other approach that was actually suggested by community as well, primarily I believe from the community, was to utilize transfer domain for it. Team is also exploring that a little bit on the pros and cons of that. But we are also trying not to overload transfer domain with too many things, and perhaps with the DFI intrinsics, it might be cleaner. However, there's still a little bit more work to be done there, and the team is working through it, and we'll have a little bit more updates in the coming weeks on how exactly it's going to be done. But this is going to be a part of the next upgrade. We're trying to get that in. As long as it's well tested by the end of March, this will make it. And if it does, then beyond that, whatever all of the splits that have been paused and migrated using oracles, they will then end up getting formally split on chain once the support is in. Then yeah, so I think rest of it we can probably cover it later. The CFP parts. Let me just jump into the CFP a little bit and try to set some context on what this is and why this is important. One is the current 10 million DFI, 200K roughly monthly is based on the expense of historically what the entire of the team has been team's expense has been over the last year. And now what this is it's essentially what is the cost of running and maintaining the blockchain, right? So running a blockchain is an expensive affair. Otherwise, everybody would be running it. And this is something, again, this is in line with some of the other networks as well. And what this means is, I think it's pretty important to have that perspective, is this is not about implementing a lot of new features. This is not about doing a lot of the R&D, but this is mostly based on implementing some of the fixes, the improvements that are needed on a day-to-day basis as the blockchain grows, and then maintaining the key infrastructure for it. That's the key. And this is why I kind of set that context on what that layer 0, 1, 1.5, and 2 is. And where the focus of this is going to be is that 0, 1, and the 1.5 part currently in transition, right? Because we can't drop it because there's still reliance on it and we have to maintain it. So we'll continue to transition that and then do whatever is needed for that 1.5 layer. However, the key focus is that 0 and 1. That's what this is focused on. And that being said, currently this whole process, we've just kickstarted it, which means that a lot of things have to shift from internal focus to now working with the community and setting out public roadmaps where everybody can see, having public calls frequently. So we're going to start opening up some of our team meetings to public meetings. So people who need to know or have regular sync points on what's happening can just tune into those meetings or ask questions, and also potentially have issue squashing sessions. So, if there's some issues that people didn't have the time to address on GitHub, then, you can just hop into those calls really quick, understand context on why it was not addressed or why it is being triaged, not to be done. So all of these kind of questions. So we're setting up all of these, and however, we have to, while building up all of these, we also have to be setting up all of these. So again, ecosystem, like everybody's been mindful of that. So decided that the first year of it is actually going to be donated by Bake and others, so that we can help through this transition, where during this part, we will iterate with the community and then slowly establish these processes as to what this Trello board has to look like. What are these release processes? How do we actually, and what is the frequency in which we should have these community calls? How all of these processes are going to look like? This is going to be the next 6 months, where we slowly iterate, build these processes up. So by the end of the year, the goal is, we are ready in a confident manner where all of the interactions have iterated. It's always going to be a constant iteration, but at least we've set the stage where everybody's comfortable with, everybody understands and is in tune with how all of these processes work. Right? That's the key intent of it. And then perhaps engineering points, what I can touch on.
Maybe one question, Prasanna. This also means that DeFiChain-Labs will be an own company, or?
Correct. It's completely independent of any other company. That's the whole goal, so that you're not dependent on other company, whatever decisions that's being made. And the roadmap for this is being set with the community, and that's kind of the Trello board that we saw. These are all the things that's required to just keep that base layer of the chain moving forward.
Okay.
Right? So things that are being built on top, or the state layer projects, like things like that, are always budget research, and then other companies These decisions can be influenced by these companies and what's needed, what's not needed, and then external community that's working on it. However, the core is something that has to be completely isolated, independent, completely focused on what are the absolute important things that's required to keep the blockchain progressing. And a part of that is also how does the blockchain enable the above layers to be able to build, right? So what the above layers are building is going to be up to community projects, companies, all of these. But however, what do we enable are things that this team is focused on as completely isolated team.
Thanks.
Right. Yeah. So, and then on the engineering front, perhaps I think there were a few questions. Maybe why don't we actually start with the questions and then we can address it?
Yeah,
Or,
okay.
yeah.
I would change just the screen, then we see. Yeah, there were a lot of questions. Someone are repeating it, but maybe this one Igor raised. Regarding block time, several times this question was raised. Do we stay at the 30 seconds? It could take longer also, depends on how fast the block is found. Or will it be changed to faster one? I think a lot of people are saying it's a little bit annoying on EVM side if you have to wait.
Yeah, that's true. Block time was on the roadmap. However, right now it's a little bit on the lower priority side, but the PR for that, a lot of the experiments have been open for a very long time. And I do think we can improve that at least by a little bit. And it's basically just requires a lot more testing on a more distributed scale. So if anybody from the community is actually interested to do that, that would be amazing. From a team perspective, the key goal, at least for this quarter, we're not taking it up because the stability was something that was a higher focus. And then we also have to start looking at, how can we continue this on a consistent basis, including, public comms, how are we going to work with all of that. So that's this quarter. I don't think it is going to make it. Next quarter, it is something in question. If we can do it, depending on how much of a bandwidth is going to take in terms of testing. If people from the community are happy to do it, that would really help. And I would personally love to see that as well. I really like to get it into the roadmap, but I think this quarter it's definitely not happening.
Yeah, thanks. Another question which I saw several times, it's regarding the rights protocol, which was shown over a year ago. I think it was was developed based on an EVM side on Ethereum, and now the question is, will it come and when?
So right protocol, I would like it's out of context of DeFiChain-Labs 1 because it is something that's on layer 2, and so this is being built by Bertie Research. I do not think there is a high priority at the moment, but I also think there's a good chunk of it is open as well. So I'll come back to you on that as to what the progress is. But this quarter, I don't think there's anything that's. I don't think we can expect anything from that.
Okay, thanks.
Right, just to set some expectations on that, but clear details on that I can come back later.
Then, regarding more to the base layer, when will the Taproot functionality be available on the native side, and would it then be possible to connect the ordinals on Bitcoin? And directly a second question, which is also common in the community, when will the atomic swap on mainnet come back?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. So Taproot, point one is people who have been following GitHub closely, I think they might have noticed Peter Bushnell might have already worked on a couple of base layers of Taproot functionality. But these are the very core functionalities, and it's not complete, but most of the groundwork is there. That being said, we do need help in seeing that through to completion. It's not a part of our the current first half roadmap, simply because of the fact that what is it going to enable is something. Yes, you can start working with something related to BTC and ordinals using Taproot, but then today, even without Taproot, in the DVM layer, there's really not much that's stopping you from doing that. Right. So, so from an overall impact perspective, we think WASM and what it can enable is going to be far more impactful rather than adding Taproot in, which is both of it are going to be equally resource intensive. So we've set the base for it, and that base is if somebody else wants to pick it up and continue forward, then we would still be happy to review it because that is a part that the core team likes to see as well. However, I do not think it's going to be addressed a lot in the kind of upcoming 6 months. That does not mean that no part of it will get
Mm.
merged. There will be smaller chunks that will be merged as and when we go, which is predominantly going to be maintenance and then upkeep related to Bitcoin, while it'll provide smaller functionalities. But Taproot overall, in order for you to have everything that you need, is a large chunk, and I do not think all of it is in our
Mhm.
roadmap.
Yeah. Thanks. The second question regarding atomic swap. People are waiting if it's coming back and when.
Atomic swap again. The part that is there's really nothing more from the technical side, but we've really not been able to put in the resource to actually test it through as much as we can. Again, we'd appreciate community help on that.
Mm.
It's there. We expect that this quarter just wrap up all the key aspects of EVM before introducing another
Okay.
entirely open vector. So get everything stable, and then we can start looking at seriously testing it
Mm.
and then opening it up. That's the way that we're thinking about it. If community thinks otherwise, because everything is done, so we just need to
Mhm.
test it. If community can substantially do significant amount of tests, that will also help greatly.
Okay. Then we are a little bit looking more into the future. Someone is asking if it's planned to connect more blockchains or integrate more EVMs, for example, a Solana virtual machine.
Okay, really good question. I think the first place we're starting with is Wasm because it's both on the VM layer as well as on the layer zero. What I mean by layer zero is this will enable us to do network upgrades on the fly, where you don't actually have to wait for another node release with a network upgrade. An existing node can just pick up in a form of a transaction and actually change behavior of the node if all the master nodes agree. So these are more interesting things that we can do. So we're focusing on that as the key VM layer. Then after that is when we start looking at other forms. Because once we integrate WASM, you can actually build other blockchain VMs on top of WASM rather than building it straight into the chain as it is today. So which will provide a lot more flexible environment and a lot easier to
Mhm.
iterate. So that's the reason we're focusing on Wasm as the first one. It is still going to be a part of that XVM. However, it also plugs into multiple different layers. And just to set expectations, are we going to be looking at something like Solana this year? I think it's very unlikely.
Good. Next interesting one, it's referring some tech talk from the past from Yusin. He was talking about we could be a kind of layer 2 for Bitcoin smart contracts. What's your thought and impression of this?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's just a very few pieces that we need to complete it. Our chain is something that natively speaks the Bitcoin protocol, and transactions are still compatible. I don't think any of that has changed. Uh, but what we have is EVM. Now we stabilize this. That is important to actually do more things once you connect it to Bitcoin. And then on the other side, you have something like WASM. Now that's going to enable very, very interesting set of capabilities because a lot of the chunks from DVM side, it might not make sense to enable all of it in EVM. But with Wasm, we can provide more capabilities there. So once we have both of these in place, we can also build a connection through the Wasm aspect. So that's how we're looking at it at the moment, and then slowly, enabling it. But just to step back, to be realistic from the components that we need to build to fully connect with BTC, it's a little bit resource intensive. That's why we're not focusing on that at the moment.
Hmm.
Just getting everything else stable first, I think, is a more important goal because we've been rolling out features, big chunks like EVM in the last year. So now I think it's important to take that time to stabilize it and then also build in the foundations, which is where Wasm Layer comes in, for us to build a lot more things going forward in the next year much easier. and in a much shorter time frame and in a more fluid manner. Then we can do all of these connections in a more structured way where it's easier for everybody to understand as well what is the process and how it actually happens.
Sounds interesting. Uh, Another reference to an old tech talk, space elevator, and yeah, there the part it was shared, coupling bridges and automation vendor. So yeah, what's our key thing? Yeah, we want to follow. Is it still part of the roadmap? And if so, which
Uh,
vendor?
okay, this is the automation vendor is I think is very interesting because you can also still currently even do little bits and pieces of that,
Hmm.
which is, but you can only do that with the D token system right now. Right? So there's not a lot that's available. But going forward, one of the ways that we think this can happen is so DVM side can do a lot of automation, EVM side cannot. But if this DVM aspect is exposed to EVM as an opcode, where you can actually use a custom opcode that's provided by DVM to say, hey, these are the automation that I want happening in EVM land, it's something that becomes very interesting. And that's what we want to accomplish. But now there's also the question of do we even want to do it in EVM land, or does it make more sense to do it in the WASM land? Is another question. We don't have the answer to that yet. I think we still need to do a little bit more research. It's definitely going to happen, but not in the upcoming 6 months.
Hmm.
Right? I know I'm saying this a lot, but I think it's important because we absolutely have to. We've rolled out a lot of big chunks, right? So if you don't get the foundations right in the coming 6 months, or also get the user experience to a really stable form, then just us rolling in big chunks is going to just be a lot more inconvenient, and things are going to be a little bit, it's not going to be as smooth as we can expect it to. So I think this for 6 months journey is going to be more about that and figuring that out, and then it's going to be easier for us to add these things in.
Cool. Question from Andreas. It's regarding a DFIP. Why it's not on the roadmap? It's related to the future swap. There should be limitation. And yeah, what is here your comment?
Oh, yes, this is actually being worked on. So this is I believe this will very likely it could make it as a part of the next
Okay.
upcoming upgrade because we don't think it's a significant change. It's something small enough that it can be done. I believe there was people from the community who had offered to help there. It was not a part of our current roadmap because we simply just couldn't accommodate it. But if someone from the community is willing to do it, then we'd be happy to refine it and then coordinate with them to make sure that it's completed. This is definitely on the list. Again, the roadmap set that you see on the board is not it's not meant to be every single small detail, right?
Okay.
So it is a large high level chunk on what are all the guiding aspects, but as a part of that, there's going to be a lot of smaller ones. And but it's future swap limitation. It's a defib, so I think it should actually be included there. I'll actually add it there. So I think it makes sense to include it.
That sounds good. Yeah. Maybe that's the last question also to you. It's regarding the USD, yeah, one of the main pain factors in the community. What's your opinion on this?
Um, so the way I personally think about it is it's that layer 1.5, and there's been a lot of discussions around it starting from 2021,
Hmm.
and there's many different approaches to it. So I'm rather more focused on layer 0 and the layer 1, and then let but that being said, one of the reasons that I'm also mentioning this is because if we do more work on that layer 0 and 1, we can effectively provide more tools that'll enable this layer to do more things, right? So again, negative interest is one of them, right? So
Hmm.
that is actually making it in the next upgrade. So DeFiChain-Labs team and I personally prefer focusing on that enables the community to do more things, and then iterate more to figure out what are the other solutions that they can do, rather than actually look into, okay, what is the stability of it. I think there are a lot more experts in the community that has looked on it with much larger magnifying glasses than I have. So I prefer to leave those to those who have actually spent a significant lot more time than me. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. That were all questions from the chat. We have nearly 1 hour. Something you want now to cover from your CFP, which was not part of the questions, maybe?
So from the CFP part, no, I'm actually, CFP part. So the intent of the CFP is to set all of these things in motion, right? So that now we're slowly starting to build what that independent team has to look like. And so my what I would encourage the community to do is, help us figure out what this structure is going to be. And everybody understands that it's important to build that out, and which is the reason that the first one is not actually it's being, all companies are donating it rather than being taken out of community funds. And I've also seen an approach where taking it out of community funds means that, whatever all the requests from the community has to be fulfilled. I will add a different perspective to it. The way that taking community funds does not mean that, everything from the community is going to be built out by this team. The idea is this is something that's required to build those base of the blockchain and keep it running, right? And community funds are still going to be there for projects to take it and then build and implement on it, right? So DeFi chain by its nature, I think, is a bit of a hybrid. What I mean by that is if you start taking a look at other networks, nobody implements. There's no core team that implements all of the equivalent of DFIPs. Right? That's usually implemented by the proposer themselves. And the role of the core team is to figure out how to integrate it. Does it make sense to integrate it? And then how do you integrate it technically and to help them through it, or even figure out whether or not it makes sense for it to go in there, right? However, on the DeFi chain land, because we also have non-Turing complete mechanisms in there, so there's a lot more work that is being done by the core team, and which the core team will continue to do, which is why that 1.5 and 1 layer separation is a little bit important. Otherwise, it sort of gets all over the place, and it becomes very difficult to manage that. And we'll continue building in this manner. However, 1.5 stuff slowly will have to transition out to the community, which includes many of the higher level economics, right? So DUSD is one example of that, but today it might not have all the tools, so the team will have to continue to support it. But also one of the key responsibility for the team is to enable more and more of these tools so people can actually be more effective and iterate on top rather than coming all the way back low.
Cool. Then, no more questions from chat. Thanks for this tech talk, first one in 2024. And I'm pretty sure it was not the last one. So we will see you again here on stage with an update. It was now a summary of different topics. Yeah, we got the impression a lot of things are happening in the background, smaller ones. Yeah, it's not this big thing, but a lot of things to fix known issues, to make it better. Also, you gave us some outlook to what can be in future. Yeah, we will see how it's happening. Very interesting. DeFiChain-Labs is still there, is getting more independent of cake or bake. Yeah, please keep this in mind. So the development of DeFi chain goes on like planned, and yeah, we are looking forward.
Yeah, I would like to think, in fact, with a lot more clarity and a better, stronger roadmap. But yeah, I think people will start to see, once we've slowly start to structure that more and provide more of those roadmap. And yeah, I'd really appreciate community's help as well to figure out how do we structure this, because this is kind of the first time that we're doing this. And even on a blockchain landscape, I think this is actually very new because most of the other blockchain landscapes either deal with just the layer 1 or layer 2 projects, right? So this is sort of this combination with this 1.5. So it is going to take us a lot of iteration on figuring out what is the right way in which we have to do.
Great. Then thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for all the questions in the chat. I would say have a nice time and see you soon here on the channel. And yeah, stay tuned what is happening here on DeFi Chain. See you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.